For more analysis on the US strike on Venezuela and its aftermath, let's bring in Brian Fonseca. He is director of the Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy at Florida International University. Appreciate you being with us.
So much for having me.
So after US forces struck various targets in Venezuela, then captured and removed Nicolás Maduro from power, President Trump declared Saturday that, quote, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. But this US action has shocked and concerned many around the world, including Greenland and Colombia, after President Trump suggested they might be next. What are the geopolitical ramifications of this US military action, and how might it impact America's relationship with the rest of the world going forward?
I think it's a great question. And first and foremost, I'm not sure that the administration is concerned strategically about the long-term impact of what it did in Venezuela. Although, to your point, it does set a precedent, and I think that's the interpretation of countries around the world. And we've seen that in a few international fora that have met to discuss sort of U.S. actions. They've suggested that it sets a really interesting and concerning precedent of a nation infringing upon another country's sovereignty to remove a head of state. And that said, though, I still don't think that the United States, this administration particularly, is really concerned about the multilateral implications. I think it has already sort of suggested that it's willing to do things on its own. I mean, just the initiation of tariffs globally earlier in the Trump administration suggests sort of a willingness to do things in a very pointed and almost sort of hawkish way in terms of how it's going to advance its foreign policy interests.
There is global concern, too, for the announcement made by President Trump that the U.S. will run Venezuela and take over the country's oil reserves. Secretary of State Marco Rubio did appear to be walking back some of this by talking about leverage over Venezuela's policy, not occupation. But how would that work? And where do you see this going next?
Yeah, another great question. I think that the president used the term run, I think very intentionally. He didn't say govern, he said run. And I think what he's implying through that is he's going to unlock the American private sector in Venezuela to acquire incredible leverage on the ground by dominating Venezuela's largest economic asset, which is its oil, and of course moving into areas like rare earth, and use that leverage to force political outcomes, to force the country to move back towards democracy, to begin to recalibrate institutions for democratic rule. I think that's what the president was referring to when Secretary Rubio, doubled down on sort of the concept of running. It was all about leveraging our U.S. dominance in the economic sector to drive political change among the sort of political landscape within domestic Venezuelan politics.
And it's worth noting that Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, initially denounced the actions of the U.S., but is now extending an invitation to the U.S. government to collaborate on an agenda of cooperation after President Trump threatened her by saying she had to cooperate or pay a very big price. What do you think Rodriguez will do in the end, and how long might she last in this position, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. She's in an incredibly difficult, nearly no-win situation. I think, again, the administration sort of leaving remnants of the regime in place to manage sort of a longer-term transition, may be the right play here. I mean, the challenge is that the opposition is deeply distrusted by most of the institutions, particularly institutions that matter the most, the military and security institutions. Those institutions deeply distrust the opposition. And I think if there was a full swing back to the opposition, there would be a lot of tension, and the country could sort of evolve or devolve into greater civil conflict. So I think the purpose of having Delcy in place is she's responsible for managing a longer-term transition. She's responsible for neutralizing or removing hardliners of the regime over time. And she's responsible for building bridges with the opposition and recalibrating institutions in preparation for a restoration of democracy. I suspect she's going to be in place for a few months, if not, up to a year. There's at some point she's going to have to call for elections. Those elections could be 12, 18 months down the road. But I think the purpose of leaving her in is to, again, reduce the prospects of deeper civil conflict and have someone who has influence in the regime sort of manage the more hardline elements of the regime to ensure that there's at least a more peaceful transition over to democracy over the next 12 to 18 months.
And Brian, what do you think President Trump means when he says the US will run Venezuela until a safe transition is made? And what do you make of his suggestion that Greenland and Colombia could be next?
Yeah, I think, again, the idea of running Venezuela is building economic influence on the ground. I mean, over the last 25 years, the United States has had a pretty persistent withdrawal from Venezuela. Up until now, the U.S. has had no real access to Venezuela on the ground. It has no civil society organizations, private sector organizations, no diplomatic engagement. All of that is going to begin to be restored going forward. You're going to see a diplomatic presence at some point. Private sector organizations are going to be on the ground. And sort of there'll be sort of more, American influence on the ground to shape policy outcomes. I think when the president references, other countries that might be next, I certainly don't think it's Colombia or Greenland. I don't think those, with Colombia, the U.S. has incredibly deep relationships. I don't see that happening. I think the message is really for Cuba and Nicaragua. Cuba and Nicaragua are the remaining sort of autocracies in the Western Hemisphere. When you think about the national security strategy prioritizing the Western Hemisphere, the administration probably has its sights on those two countries, Cuba being personal for Secretary Rubio. But I think those are the countries that the administration is really referencing, that it's going to, that it's going to work on affecting some form of change, during this particular administration's term.
Brian Fonseca, appreciate you joining us. Many thanks.
Thank you.